Good evening and welcome everybody to the Culinary Historians meeting for June. And tonight, as Ed Sullivan say, we have a really big show. We have a wonderful culinary historian who is part of America's culinary history, and she has quite a story to tell us. Uh, Elena Terry. I met Elena last year in Spring Green, Wisconsin, at Frank Lloyd Wright's Theater at Taliesin. Elena was part of a Native American program where we got to see Native American art, food, culture, dance, and it was an amazing program, an all-day program. And I spoke to Elena after she spoke. I was blown away by the story she had to tell, the poignant story about the Native Americans in America. And by the way, Elena, I just want to clarify something. I see Native Americans referred to as Native Americans or American Indians. Is there a proper way, or either or can you tell me, clarify that for me?
Yeah, I mean, usually First Nations is what we go by.
Okay, okay. And the others are extraneous, or are they okay?
Yeah, I guess if you're looking at the most PC term, then
Yes, yes. And the most PC term again is
First Nations.
First Nations. And you're the first of the First Nations. I cannot, well, people will hear what you have to say, but I was so blown away by your story. And let me give a little bit about your background. And Elena was a traditional foods cook and working in the restaurant industry for over a decade. And several years ago, she shifted her focus to community building, merging her passions and focusing on educating through indigenous foods. Elena has developed partnerships with James Beard Foundation, the Smithsonian, Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, U.S. State Department, Intertribal Agriculture Council, American Indian Foods Program, Advocates for Urban Agriculture, to name a few. She is not chopped liver. And Elena is also a butcher and wild game specialist and prefers open fire and outdoor cooking. And you are about to open, or have you opened, a wonderful restaurant at the museum in Madison, Wisconsin. What are you what state what's going on with your restaurant right now?
We're building it currently, so it's not open yet. We're hoping for sometime in the fall.
And can you tell, let's give a little, well, not a commercial plug, it's fascinating where it's located, the
Sure.
building it's located in, and what you will be doing there.
Yeah, so I am the executive chef at Tall Grass at MMOCA, the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art. And it's pretty fascinating the way I came to that space, and that I was a 2025 Alliance for California Traditional Arts Taproot Fellow, which meant that not only am I considered an artist of folk art, but I'm also a traditional knowledge keeper and community builder. So, I was able to have this wonderful year of fellowship with other traditional knowledge keepers, and actually the first of two year one ever culinary artists that were acknowledged in that space as culinary arts being an actual folk art. So that was super cool. And as I was going through this year, the director of the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art approached me and said, "We see you as far more than just a traditional artist. And culinary arts is also contemporary. And we would love for you to open the space on your ancestral homelands, doing what we know you are capable of doing, because what they are wanting there is I'm also being treated as a curator. So I'll be able to bring in some of my fellow chefs that have wonderful stories to tell and have meals celebrating them in that space. So it really is monumental. I'm not being brought in as an exhibit, I'm being brought in as a partner and as a valuable artist in the space. So very I think it's just for me as a female chef who's also a butcher and a wild game specialist, a live fire expert. It's definitely a moment that I could have only have dreamt of about a decade ago, and now I'm like living that dream.
When does your restaurant open?
We're hoping sometime in the fall. We're building it in a building that's an icon. You know, I'm not too sure if anybody knows what Emoka is, but it's on State Street between the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the Capitol, and it kind of comes to a point, and it's a glass point. So the building itself is a piece of art, and we're building a space inside there, and I have total design control over the space, which is really exciting. I can't share anything past that, but it is going to be my concept on tall grass. So,
Can't wait. And I'm in my Chicago home right now, but I go back and forth between Chicago and Spring Green, which is where I saw you at Tellius. And as soon as you open, I'm going to try to get a reservation there. So, and how do we get reservations there?
I'm not too sure what we haven't finalized a contract with who's going to be doing our table like reservations yet. So just I guess keep your eyes open and be prepared because there is rumors that maybe I would be doing a pop-up in August to get the staff trained while we're still building because I also run the rooftop space at MMocha, which is a beautiful rooftop sculpture garden, and that will also be part of Tallgrass. So.
Can't wait. And
Yeah,
I guess
I can't
just,
wait either for everybody to come so I can feed you. But in
well,
the meantime, Scott, can I tell a story?
yes, I wanted to get, if people are thinking that I'm plugging you or promoting you, I absolutely am. It's like show and tell. I want everybody to know about this treasure, this cultural food treasure coming. Okay, you go ahead and take it away.
Okay, so I just want to say hello and good evening to everybody. Ho chunk rajara hahemani wenga hingaire, nagomakane rajara Elena Terry ga hingaire. So I just wanted to say that in my language, that of the Ho Chunk people. Uh, that it's good to see all of you. And my name, I like to speak my name before I speak in front of people, just because it kind of, for me, calls my spirit back. So I am a chef, and I am the founder of a nonprofit called Wild Bearies. And Wild Bearies is spelled like the animal, not the fruit, because I named it after my children. I was a foster mom for over a decade and had a beautiful children come in and become part of my family, and a lot of them were Bear Clan. And I wanted to create a space where they they could always come and get nourished, not necessarily just a meal, but to get everything that comes along with that, because food really is medicine, and that's not just a catchphrase. It's the truth. But you have to look at it for what it is, right? Like food is alive. It's a living being that we interact with. The plants, the animals, the water, and the beings in the water. I mean, all of those things are living and have energy, as do we as living things. And that energetic exchange for us is where the medicine is, right? Otherwise, it just exists. Like a plant will exist and it will have all of these beautiful properties. But if we don't interact with that plant, it just belongs to the plant. So we really like to look at um, how food as medicine is when we are part of, like, a crucial part of this equation. And acknowledging the difference between being nutritionally satisfied and truly being nourished after a meal. So it isn't something or a concept that is exclusive to Indigenous or First Nations peoples. I mean, everybody has a food that connects you to your culture and that can bring you home, right? Like that's the beauty of food, is that I could ask every one of you, especially being culinary historians, to close your eyes and to think of your favorite meal. And you could be transported in time, in space, brought to people that might not be here any longer, and that it will elicit sensical memories in your blood. Like this is a transfer again of energy. And it's how that heals us with each other in a tribal concept, in community that we focus on with Wild Berries. And I kind of wanted to go in depth with that because I wanted to tell you a story tonight. And this is why, Scott, I believe I told this story, and it is something that's very, very close to me, is the story of the three sisters, and more specifically with these three sisters, a bean, because the three sisters are the corn, the bean, and the squash, right? And there are stories in First Nations that bring these three sisters to creation, where they were sent down from the heavens to care for us. And agriculturally, they work perfectly together. Like the corn grows very tall and it kind of protects everything and looks out, and the beans climb up the corn and it gives them space, and they feed it through nitrogen in the soil, and then the squash helps keep the ground cool, and it kind of covers and cares for the other two, and they grow perfectly together. Like all of these stories have them, from other tribes have these stories of the three sisters, and scientifically it works. So as a ho-chunk and as a chef and as somebody who has my daughter is our organization Seed Saver, and she's currently going to the UW-Madison for her master's in agroecology, and I love it for her. And I think as I watched her learn how to save our ancestral seeds, like ones that we have passed down through generations that have been hand pollinated so that they're not affected by GMO corn. Like that is what my daughter does. And it's just really inspiring to me. So that's part of the reason why this story is even being told today. But that was just a sidebar. So all of these tribes in Wisconsin have stories of the three sisters, and they were growing them, even 20 years ago. And as a ho chunk, we definitely have stewarded corn for generations. And even more specifically, there's families who have stewarded um, very specific varieties of this corn. So we have like Ho Chunk pure white corn and Ho Chunk speckled blue corn or bronze beauty corn, which is very specific to Ho Chunk. And so important that it shows up at ceremony with us now. Over the hundreds of years that we have been stewarding this corn, it has become part of our community. And as I was talking to my daughter and a couple of our other growers, I was like, it just doesn't make sense that Ho Chunks only had corn. Like we had to have had more than that. And I, as a chef, one of my favorite ingredients is squash. And I thought we had to have had squash, right? Like squash had to have existed as well. So we started looking, my seed savers did, and we reached out to multiple tribal farms. We reached out to the Seed Savers Alliance, to the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, to like tribal farms trying to find a squash, and we weren't able to, like nothing. We came up empty, and and we had to look at history. And so our verbal history as Ho-Chunk say, we were removed from this area, our homelands, throughout the entire state of Wisconsin, uh, 16 times. The Indian Agency House in Portage, Wisconsin will confirm that that number is 11 at least, but our verbal history says it was up to 16 times. We were removed forcibly on railroad cars, forced to swim across the Mississippi River, and brought to places like Crow Creek, which really was a concentration camp in South Dakota on the Missouri River. Every time the Ho-Chunks returned back to Wisconsin as outlaws, we were never meant to be here. The Ho-Chunks still to this day do not have a reservation or landmass because we are still not meant to be here. However, the federal government has granted us trust lands throughout the state, which we are, it acts kind of similarly, but it isn't a confined, centralized land base. It's scattered. and and half of our DNA and our ancestors traveled down the Missouri River from the Crow Creek camp in South Dakota to Omaha, Nebraska, and what is now known as Winnebago, Nebraska, where the other half of our ancestors did receive a reservation. And now we're actually recognized as two completely different federal tribes, although our ancestors can be DNA verified to have come from Wisconsin pre-contact, all of our bloodlines. So even though our lineage and our bloodline and our DNA is similar, we are recognized federally as two different entities, one existing on a reservation in Winnebago, Nebraska, and the other existing kind of as outlaws throughout the entire state of Wisconsin. So why is that important, right? In the story, it is. Listen. So we were looking and looking and came up empty. And one day I was at my seed saver's house and a car pulled up and this woman jumped out and she had a squash and it was green and it was about this long and about this wide and it was clearly a winter squash. And she said, "Hey, are you blah blah blah?" And we were like, "Oh yeah, that's us here." And she said, "I don't know if you're interested in this, but I heard the farm was here and if you'd like, I have some Winnebago squash and you're happy, like you're please eat it, but if you'd like to save the seeds, you're welcome to have those seeds." And we were like, "What?" And she said, "We have the history of the squash here." And she did. She had a history of where it had been grown. And she said, and it comes from Winnebago. And I know you're Ho Chunk, but I don't know if you'd want this because it is a Winnebago squash. It's been grown down there by the Winnebago and the Omaha. And we were like, "Oh my gosh, of course we want this squash." Like we've been asking for the squash. And then on this random day, this woman came and delivered a squash. And so we harvested the seeds, we cured them, and we now had corn and squash. And we were like, well, it just doesn't make sense that we wouldn't have had the third sister, right? Like there had to have been a being. We didn't just have two of the sisters. So we started the search again and we searched even farther, again, coming up empty-handed. Like we went to seed banks, to seed exchanges, to historians, to agriculturalists, to tribal farms, and nobody had any record of a bean being grown by Ho Chunks, let alone having a seed that would be like a viable source for us to continue this on. And so we thought like in true Field of Dreams fashion, build it and it will come. And we thought the work we needed to do had to continue. And yeah, the more we could prepare for this, the more it maybe would come. And we actually prayed about it and asked for this to return to us because for us it was more than a seed. It was more than a food source. This was a relative. It's a living being, like a seed is alive, just waiting for you to plant it and to care for it so that it can fulfill its life destiny and become what it was meant to be. Like our relationship went so much deeper than consumption when it came to our foods traditionally. And it was more based on a reciprocal relationship, right? Like we cared for these plants and not only for the plants, but for the spaces that they lived in. Like we stewarded the land and we stewarded the spaces. Like me, I'm Ho Chunk. I'm a woodland First Nations person, and it means a lot to me because that means fresh water and trees and moss and ferns and all of these beautiful things that come with woodland. I also live in Wisconsin Dells, down the road from a verified archaeological dig site that has confirmed that Ho Chunks were agricultural people. Like we didn't just forage and we didn't just hunt, but we had a cultivated raised garden bed garden that serviced a 20 square mile village between Wisconsin Dells and Reedsburg. And it exists and it has been carbon dated and there's a sign outside that says, this is a historic site and this is confirmed, one of the oldest confirmed raised garden beds. And we were cultivators. There had to have been a bean, right? Like there had to have been. And there's stories that during these removals, like the reason we had corn was because our ancestors thought enough of those seeds to sow them into their clothes, like not even grabbing what they could, their family, but they had heard of these removals and they knew the importance of bringing these seeds, believing that if we had these seeds with us, we would be able to get home. We would not only have the strength to get home, but they would help guide us to where we were, where they would grow. They were our relatives, and we interacted with them differently, and we didn't, that the thought of leaving them behind was not one that our ancestors had. Like, they were going to bring them with us. So we knew there had to have been a being. And at this point in our organization, we were starting to expand from just not just a culinary mentorship program, which is what Wild Bearies is. And our culinary mentorship program provides services for individuals who are overcoming alcohol and other drug abuse issues or emotional trauma through this philosophy that food is medicine. And there's a lot of healing that can happen here. So we had the culinary mentorship program, and we were starting to get into community gardens and having spaces, even in people's front yards in our tribal communities, where we could put in like watermelon or fresh vegetables and have it accessible to everybody in that community. Because, like I said, we don't have a reservation, but we do have tribal trust lands, which are like mini pockets of communities throughout the entire state. And that's where we were at. With this culinary mentorship program, you can imagine being, culinarians, that sometimes burns and headaches and stuff like that happen in a kitchen. And I had a partnership with a fellow named Chris Hubbard, and he is a grower and has a farm in the Appalachian Mountains in Kentucky. And every year we would order a box of salves from him, like restless leg salve, which is, this home brew of wonderful herbs that he grows on his farm and makes tinctures and stuff out of. He had done this, in the 20 teens. In December of 2019, I received my package from, I think it's Wildwood Farms, or is the name of his farm, but Chris sent me the package for that year. And when I opened up this package, on the very top of it was a manila envelope, and it had his little stamp for his farm on there. And I immediately recognized Pachchinunk, Nishla. These are names of our villages. In Ho-Chunk, like those are the Ho-Chunk names. Like Pachchinunk is Wittenberg area. Nishla is where I live here in Wisconsin Dells. And they were on this envelope. There's like this tiny manila envelope. And I was like, what the heck is this? Along with dates and other areas. And I immediately opened up this envelope and I shook it out. And in my hand were 20 tiny little bean seeds, like smaller than a lentil, if you can imagine. And I was like, what is this? I immediately called up Chris Hubbard and I said, Chris, what is this? What did you send me? So follow me along here. In the early 90s, my uncle, who has since passed on, was running the Wangshik powwow at the UW Madison. And as he was running that powwow, he had the thought to invite his friend Chris, who was at that time a PhD student for, I always want to say, like, plant mastery. I don't know exactly what he was getting it in, but it had to do with agriculture and plants being medicinal purposes as well. And he was getting his PhD, and he was friends with my uncle. And he invited him to the powwow. And at that powwow, he introduced him to an old tribal grower named Jerry Cloud. And when my uncle ran off to do his work, Jerry and Chris had a conversation. And I only knew this because I called Chris to find out, where he reached into his pocket and he pulled out these seeds. And he said, look, Chris, I have these seeds and I have a history that goes along with them. And I'm the only person that has grown these seeds since, I think it was like the late 40s, somewhere around the end of World War II. Jerry received the seed and was just a grower. He just loved his garden. And he said, I'm the only one, but they're important. They're Ho-Chunk seeds, and they came from Omaha, Nebraska, Winnebago, Nebraska, Crow Creek, South Dakota. It was somewhere just a little west or east of Pipestone, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And they had a history back to the mid 1800s of being grown in these spaces. And like, we had prayed for this bean. And when Jerry gave this bean to Chris, he didn't know, and who could have known? Because Chris was a third generation bean steward. His grandfather loved saving beans and growing them. He loved pole beans, he loved bush beans, he loved ancestral varieties, he loved new beans. He had a whole catalog, a glass bean catalog of all of these different beans, and he grew them out from the grandfather to the father to Chris. Grew out all of these beans in a rotating pattern so that they would always be viable and alive, the seeds in their seed encyclopedia. And he said, yeah, and as I was putting that box together, Elena, I just thought, well, she's Ho-Chunk. Maybe she'd like these beans to grow. And I was like, Chris, do you have any idea that we were actually praying for that bean to come back to us? And in my mind, all I could see was this tiniest little bean kind of with like a grandma scarf on, with an old traditional dress of the Ho Chunk women, because that's the way I picture my great grandma sitting on her porch, kind of like waking up in bed and like feeling this ray of sunshine calling her back to the homelands and saying, like, she did her job for us. That bean swam across the river, was forced to places, and she grew for us. And I say she because for us, we respect our seeds as women because they give life and they are the life. And so that's what we always refer to them as she. And she grew in a concentration camp. And she went down the Missouri River and she grew in unknown spaces to care for us, not like to give our ancestors who we are, Ho Chunk, the ones who returned, and acknowledge ourselves as Ho-Chunk because we like it means like people of the big voice literally is the translation, but for us, I mean, there isn't an English translation. For us, I would say like I'm Ho-Chunk. It's like the way I have the ability to speak directly to the creator. Like that is what Ho-Chunk means, is that I have that ability to speak to the creator. And it like she heard us. And I picture her because Chris is like 6'6" and he wears overalls every day and he has a big straw hat. And I just picture this tiny little being being like, I'm ready. I'm ready to go home. Like she had to take a break and she was cared for and she rested and she heard us call and say, like, we're ready. We're ready to take care of you. And that first year, like, we could never have known what 2020 was going to bring for us. And she came in December of 2019. So 2020 was the first year that we grew her, and we didn't know if she was going to be a bush bean or a pole bean, or if she was even going to be a viable seed and sprout. And 2 weeks after we planted her, my seed saver called and she said, she's a pole. I had to build, a trellis for her to climb. And I remember I have it on my phone, actually, the very first sprout that appeared. And it was like this tiniest little, and I don't know if any of you have grown beans, but it kind of looks like they have a hat, like as it comes on, as the flower drops and they start to protrude. And I have a picture of the very first one that grew, and it was during 2020. And as a tribe, we had no idea what we would be facing when it came to food insecurity during that year. I mean, we were 2 weeks away from like complete food insecurity in our communities. And it was such an eye-opening moment in time where we actually did have our three sisters here to care for us again. And it was like time and time and time again, these plants have shown up for us. And the way my ancestors tell it is that they come to fulfill their destiny, right? Like they come to do what they were meant to do, which is care for us. And in us saying that we were ready to care for them again, they did return, and that we need to take a look at this moment in time and not just as traditional knowledge people, but as really an awakening in saying how we care for each other and in creating these spaces. How are we allowing our food to care for us? So she grew, but slow food doesn't even begin to explain what this process is, right? Like, if anybody has grown food out from a bean, I mean, that was 2020 and I still am not able to grow the bean in for Elena is one of the founding board members of this organization, and we still don't have enough seed. So hopefully maybe my grandchildren will be able to have enough of this seed to grow her in our tribal communities prolifically, and we will really have her back. So since then, we have had a second squash and a second bean return in the past 6 years, but we still don't have enough of those to grow out more than in like our secret garden spaces where we really have to make sure that we are hand pollinating these seeds and protecting them genetically. So my daughter who does the seed work for us, it's pretty amazing because she met a corn last year that is carbon dated 1500 years in northern Canada. Like what that kind of food journey had to have been is not, it's intergenerational to say the least, because as I'm sure you know, corn comes from Oaxaca, Mexico. The fact that we've been able to steward it for over 1,000 years and have record of that means that, those journeys through mountains and insane terrain happened on foot or with minimal resources like several thousand years ago. And that is just amazing that we still have these food sources to date. And when you look at Ho Chunk or First Nations people in general, the fact that we have any link to our traditional and ancestral food sources is a much stronger uh, record of resilience and traditional practice. Because is for me, growing up, there were times when we would be, out in the woods foraging and living in Wisconsin Dells. I don't know if any of you guys know what the Dells is, but it's a very sacred spot of land or area for the Ho-Chunk people. This river, the formations of rock along this river in this section of the Dells only exists in three places on Earth. So it's very sacred. We have stories about creation in this river, and it's really difficult to access some of those resources in being a Ho-Chunk. And there were times when people would see us on the side of the road harvesting some of our traditional medicine or food, and we would get made fun of. And I myself, it never bothered me because I loved those times. Like I loved being in the field, like send me out to get the milkweed. I will go with you, Grandma, every single time because I loved being with my grandparents and they were the ones who did it. It wasn't until I was older that I realized that those actions, those practices were never because of lack of resource. It was always because our understanding is that when you receive that knowledge, it's your responsibility to share it. And we share it in ways where it can be received, where you do have sensical memories, where I know what I'm looking for when I go to harvest certain things because I remember the way it smells. I remember the way the air feels in that space or the conversations that I had. Like all of those things are built, like they're instilled, burned into me in a good way. And so I go and do those practices with my child. And for, since the beginning of time, that's how we learned as First Nations people. It was how we learned through sensical learning. And so as I got older, I realized that it was the privilege. The privilege was that they continued taking us out there because there were so many people that did not have those experiences and that are now trying to reclaim those practices, having been a few generations removed. And when I say removed, I want to explain that my mother, and I'm not going to tell her story, she's since walked on, but she was a survivor of boarding schools. It wasn't, my great, 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 great grandparents who survived boarding schools. It was my mother, one generation back, where we were still being stolen from our families and sent to school to assimilate us. And and I can say, without speaking on her experience, I can say that it changed my life, her having to go to that school. And so how can we use those experiences? How can I use the practice of like, "Ah, we prayed for this food to come back to us and it came, it returned," or I know that if I'm feeling lonely or missing my relatives who have passed on, I have these spaces where I can go and be cared for by them. Like these spaces that it is where it's still my responsibility to steward the land, where I still go to the river to check on the water quality or to advocate for accessibility so that we can still have ceremony on the river shore where it's illegal for us to be unless we have a watercraft. So if I had my jet boat, I could be there. But if I walked there on my, ancestral path to get to that spot, it's illegal for me to be there. All of these things, come hand in hand with my food journey because it is part of who I am, right? I was asked the other day, I was on a panel and somebody said, when you made your entrepreneurial plan, how did you tackle honoring cultural identity? And for me, that was really easy because I made my plan around my cultural identity. I don't know how that could ever be compromised for me. And it's important that I hold that space and that I own that space and that I can acknowledge I deserve that space because I feel like everything I have done on my journey from, age 3 at the first time my great grandmother showed me how to process wild meat until today when I just got back from a trip where I was harvesting sheep for the dîner. Like all of these experiences I learn from and I grow from. And I think that is the medicine, right? It's also living it. It's also being able to share this story and to prove that miracles can happen, even if it's something as small as a bean coming back to us. It was a prayer answered, a direct answer to our prayer that that bean came back to us, that we needed, like the strength and the nourishment that came along with that bean and the story that it carried was even just as fantastic and strong and resilient as those of the humans that had that same story, in that this being lived and endured and continued to grow in these insane environments and where there were proven strategies to erase it. It continued to grow and it came home when we asked it to. And so I think with us and with Wild Bearies and with me in particular as a chef and kind of the founder of that organization, it really does show the power of food and the ability for that food to bring us together, however it is, right, around a table and to be able to possibly share stories. Because if I were to talk to you about colonization and the long-term intergenerational effects of strategies of erasure when it comes to culture, food, traditional practices, um, we're able to continue those today because of our relationship with food. And as I have been on this journey with my own self and my own family here, I was working in corporate restaurants, especially in the Dells area, because I needed set hours and I needed, a regular income. But it was really difficult for me because I would be closing the restaurant on a Saturday night and leaving to go to ceremonies like our traditional Ho Chunk Lodge ceremonies. And then I would stay there, but I'd have to leave early because I'd have to go back and close the restaurant. And it would mean like from Saturday morning until Sunday late at night, uh, I would be awake and I would be working, ceremony working, and then come home and try and get my kids off to school. And I was like, there's got to be a better way for me to live because this is no way to live, right? Like, I want, in order to be Elena, I have to be able to go to ceremonies. But in order to go to ceremonies, I have to be able to work and I have to be able to provide for my family. And so there was just a moment after my youngest graduated high school where I said to myself, like, I'm really just going to have to trust this journey. And to say that if I start this nonprofit and make talking about, the trauma that we have to face in our communities, it not exclusive to First Nations people, but just to humans. Like we have a lot of trauma in our communities and things that we've had to endure. And now with accessibility and so much technology and advancements that we sometimes forget the simple things and the quiet and the slowness that we need. And as a Ho-Chunk woman, like I need that in my life. So being able to connect to those foods differently, we started making a pledge and said, I want to change one thing about one meal, just one ingredient on one meal once a week. Let's do that. We can do that, right? And we started to. So, but like instead of oatmeal, we made blue corn pudding for breakfast. And instead of white rice, we would have wild rice. Or, we would have the vegetables that we grew in our little garden in the backyard instead of going out and overbuying a bunch of food from the grocery store. Like we're going to eat what we have and that's going to be enough. And we started changing the way we thought about food, not just like mindlessly consuming it, but like how are we interacting with our food? And for me, I personally have suffered from endometriosis and you know, pre-diabetes, high blood pressure. Making that one change once a week started like a ripple, turned into a wave, turned into just like this completely different relationship that us as a family had with our food. And over like 10 years of giving myself the grace to learn what I really do want in my life when it comes to my relationship with food and as a chef, right? Like sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, I just want to eat all of that and try it all. But how am I going to feel? How am I going to feel about myself? How am I physically going to feel? Maybe I should censor what I'm going to be eating or make a plan ahead of time so that I don't feel yucky because I don't want to feel yucky from something as beautiful as food. And being kind of the matriarch of my family, once I made those changes, the changes happened with my kids naturally, and even with my siblings, they wanted to start trying different things. And as a chef, I think the beauty of it for me was in trusting the journey. Not only did I create a space that I wanted to work in, which is like in indigenous food sovereignty, but I also was able to help pave the way for others to follow that same dream and to have those same connections and find really what that food is medicine part means to us when we acknowledge ourselves differently in that equation. And so for us, it has been an incredibly beautiful healing journey, not just in like having these historical things come back to us or the space that we're creating, but it also has been a reclamation of ourselves in this space and how we are. Because it's been proven there was policy after World War II that we have refrigerators now. Let's see these TV dinners hit the shelves. Food isn't safe unless it's frozen and you're reheating it, or you know the thought that anything that you got on your own that wasn't off of a shelf wasn't safe really tainted us for generations on how we perceive our food and our food sources, and it really tunneled us to the grocery store. So being able to even be like resistant of that and to say I know what to eat, even if it was that I learned that because I didn't want to stop swimming. And so we went to the woods and we found the flowers and the berries and we knew how to hunt those things because that was definitely part of it. Part of the reason I was such a good forager was because I didn't want to have to walk back from the swim spot to have lunch. But like, what a beautiful asset in that I had people that were also there willing to teach me. My older cousins were like, hey, I know a spot where we can find some blueberries, or did you know you could eat this flour and it's enough to make it to dinner? Like all of these ways that we taught each other, it was always in community in these sensically learning environments. And we continue to do that today. So I guess, yeah, I wanted to share a little bit about that, a little bit about our history, and really express what this food journey means to somebody like me, not just as a chef, but as a ho-chunk female who's a knowledge keeper who, very transparently learns something new every day when it comes to food and loves it. I'm a novice gardener. I hate to say it because I was always like, I'm gonna grow the corn and I will be successful at the corn, but my daughter, who I referenced earlier, who's like this phenomenal grower, was like, Mom, I think I think you need to acknowledge that the corn has never grown for you, but the beans do, and they do. So I just had to be like, okay, maybe I just like corn is not for me. I'm gonna grow the beans and they continue to grow. So that's what I care for at my home. She cares for corn at her home, and we have somebody else who multiplies squash seeds along with some of the other things that we grow. And as a chef, I think that I have the most beautiful job and that I get to kind of have access to all of the ingredients and and I am tasked with putting them on a plate in a way that others can relate to it, where I can hopefully continue to make those food memories for others. And maybe one day when my grandchildren are out there gardening and they're planting these beans, they can say like, I remember how grandma told me that she returned to us, like that this bean came back to us, and they'll have that story and they'll know that when we have the privilege of eating this bean, that it comes with so much more than just that meal and in that moment, that this was the intention. And we only have this bean today because, our ancestors knew how important it was that we didn't leave her behind, that she came with us, and that knowing when we did bring her with us that she would care for us. And here she is today, still doing that. So I wanted to leave a little bit of time in case there were any questions, but I wasn't sure if you guys wanted me to keep talking or if you wanted me to answer some of the questions that have been coming through.
I do have a question for you, Elena. When I went to that magnificent event at Frank Lloyd Wright's beautiful architectural treasure of a theater at Taliesin, and I saw you, and I saw such an amazing array of culture and things that I never knew about. And talk about a true American history, and I didn't know anything about it. That's why I went to learn, and boy, did I learn. How do people find out more about our American history, which you represent? How do we find out this is such a major part of our history? How do we know more about this?
I mean, I think it's safe to acknowledge that everybody exists on native land of some sort. So like no matter
Mhm.
where you're at on Turtle Island, you are living on somewhere that was indigenous to somebody. And so I would say start there and find out. I also have Potawatomi, which is, Chicagoland area. And so we actually have names for those regions. And I would say, yeah, find out who lived where you're at now. And that's a wonderful way to start and to learn about it because throughout the entire country, uh, there are, I don't know how many federally recognized tribes, but there's even more when you include the ones who aren't federally recognized yet. And every single tribe has its own history. Every single tribe is its unique nation and has a history exclusive to them. And what colonization, what contact, all of that, even to reclamation and current status, is very unique to every single tribe. So, yeah, I would say find out even areas that you might be passionate about, find out who lived there and what their stories are, because it is fascinating, but it is so broad and so distinctly different that you would really, I mean, that's why I learn something new every single day that I go to work because there's so much that is unspoken.
And when I was in elementary school, we were always taught that Columbus discovered America. And as a little kid, I thought, but there were Indians here. I mean, how could he have discovered something? Anyway, do you have any thought on that? Because that's been the myth that Columbus discovered America.
Yeah, I mean, clearly he did not. Like clearly there are people who existed here throughout the Americas because it's north, south, it's not just one America. And the people who occupy the Americas are so distinctly different that yeah, how could you possibly discover something that was in existence, for a time from the beginning of time for us? We have stories about ice ages even in surviving through these. So um, and that's not exclusive to Ho Chunks, by the way. So I think it's really difficult to even understand that concept. I mean, he didn't discover something that existed, but I think it is important to touch on what he stumbled on, and the long-term effects of that. Because when you look at what the conquistadors did in South America, and what England, Spain, like what had happened since contact, it wasn't anything that was a tribally focused. So when you think of what a tribe actually is and how we care for each other and the way that we lived in reciprocity in the land as stewards, very proudly as stewards of this land, the values were not the same. And look at, hundreds of years later, we're still suffering the long-term effects of those practices that were brought with the people who came to explore.
Thank you. And Kathy, would you
Okay.
do your wonderful job and
Hmm.
get the question?
So Margaret Carney, who's also has a museum on dinnerware, she wondered how would one find out if something like what Elena is experiencing is happening in the Hudson Valley in New York.
Yeah. So there are things like that happening in New York, and there are some amazing things that the tribes are doing. I'm not too sure. It's been a while since I've been to that area, but I do know that like the Senecas have a really thriving farm production, and I believe they have bison back on the land there and maple production. There are tribes out in that area. I think there's a few who are running fish distribution as well. So there are some hubs where you can find out if there's work happening. I know the Intertribal Agriculture Council has some resources linked to them where you can see and support indigenous producers, and they have that broken down regionally. So there are some resources where you can see if you want to support, and usually, from what I've found, is that they're more than willing to also offer tours and share some of the knowledge if you contact them directly. So,
I have a question, and it's all related to what Scott was asking you earlier about how, and maybe you also, how to refer to American Indians or the Native. And I talked to somebody who often interacts, and he said, refer to them by their tribal name. He says, you'll never get into trouble if you refer to them by their tribal name. You say something else, and you never know what it is that they favor, but
yeah,
refer to
and
them
it's
by their
it's
tribal
usually
name, you're
okay to
okay.
ask also. It's
Oh,
a lot
sure.
better to, just to ask and to find out what those cultural preferences are than to assume, and I know on my behalf, I always appreciate somebody asking to find out because I'm more than happy to explain if you're, and so this is the word that if there's a single word that I could emphasize, it's the authentic part of being an ally. And I think that the authenticity that you can put out when you are inquiring and not having that be an extractive inquisition, but like I want to support you. How can I do that? How would you like me to refer to you? Like how Scott said at the beginning, is this appropriate? How would you like to be called? Like this is what like this addresses who I am. I'm one of the First Nations on this land, right? And that's how, and there's no offense there. But if you are assuming something and you want me to be an ally or you want to be an ally to me under an assumption, then that's not really being authentic, or honoring that maybe I don't want to be called this, or maybe I don't want to receive this Inquisition or something like that. But being open and understanding in that and respecting that relationship, which really is what it is if you're having a conversation with me, we're developing a relationship with each other, right? Like I think that if you just handle it the same way you would handle any other relationship, it would be fine.
Okay, Mr. Flick said your discussion about heritage seeds and the pains taken to preserve them was interesting. 2 years ago, the Morgan Library and Museum in New York City, of all places, had an exhibit in the building on Maze, while outside the library on East 36th Street, they planted a few strands of corn. It was really amazing to see the tall stalks with just a few narrow, long leaves. That differs so much from the GMO hybrids we now see in northern Illinois. Um, Fields with big, fat, spiky leaves.
Yeah, I was able to go to Oaxaca in August of 2024 and see their corn harvest and meet several of the corn that they were growing in three different regions, and they were so distinctly different, and especially compared to like the soldier corn that you see the GMO that is like exactly alike. And each one of these corn in Oaxaca had a distinctly different genetic makeup. So one was built to withstand monsoons. One was built to withstand a cold winter based on their region, and one fed itself. It didn't need a bean to replenish the nitrogen. It's able to do that on its own. And so, yeah, it's so incredibly beautiful. If you ever get a chance to dive into corn, take it. Take it, learn as much as you can. There's so much to know about corn.
Audrey inquired, would you consider your work an act of indigenous food sovereignty, or maybe more of a combined effort by both yourself and the food?
So I just don't even think that I can talk about food sovereignty, which is, when you say indigenous food sovereignty, you're referring to a person's or a tribe's ability to feed themselves, which is, the sovereign part of that. Um, I don't think we can even start to address food sovereignty until we can address food security in our communities, not exclusive to indigenous peoples. So, like on the greater scale in Wisconsin Dells, I know that our food pantries are straining right now in our greater community, and it isn't just indigenous peoples that are suffering. So, I think until we can start tackling what food security looks like for everybody, we can't really start talking about what food sovereignty is. We can discuss a reclamation of traditional practices and traditional food ways and resources.
I'm glad you interpreted the indigenous food sovereignty because I wasn't quite sure what that meant in this context. Rebecca says, is there a tribal grower we could learn about through a book or online? How can we learn about the ways in which First Nations grew their food?
There's a lot of resources. I know Braiding Sweetgrass is a great book to read, especially if you're kind of getting into indigenous traditional ecological knowledge and also modern practices. Also, I think it's called Seed Keeper's Daughter. That's another one that's or the Seed Keeper and then Fire Keeper's Daughter. There's a lot of great indigenous books out there. And there's just been like this past couple years, at least 7 to 10 indigenous cookbooks that have come out. So you can just do a Google search and find a lot of resources. There's a lot more that has been emerging as of the past decade.
Donna inquired, I live on Upper Skagit tribal land where they managed a Kamas bulb production. I'm not sure if they actually planted seeds like your ancestors did. What would you suggest as to learn more about their agricultural and eating practices? I know there was hunting and foraging, but less sure about their agricultural practices.
I think it's safe to say that most tribes did have agricultural practices for supplemental food stores. Um, like I said, corn has existed and can be proven to have been grown in North America, not just South America or Central. for over 1500 years ago. So I think that if you just reach out, even I know most tribes, like 95% have um, some sort of history department or heritage preservation or cultural preservation. They might be labeled a little bit differently. But again, if you go as an ally, not just trying to say like, I just want to know about all of these things, but say like, I'm very interested in learning more. It's how you also approach because know that the only reason, like, or be mindful that the only reason we still have this knowledge was because we kept it protected, and we did so because it was targeted, and so sometimes there is a hesitancy to share, and that just has to be respected. Sometimes it's also intertribally. Like I get told no sometimes, and I'm okay with that because maybe they are not at a point to share or where they want to share, or they have shared what they want to, and I'm respectful of that as well because I'm also learning from them. Um, and learning, I'm also giving them something in return, like I'm offering something for what they're sharing with me. So that's just kind of also a traditional practice between First Nations people that I like to respect when I'm in new places and trying to learn about their history as well, because a lot of people do want to tell a story. They want to tell you their story from their point of view without worrying about what's going to happen with that story, right? Like I want to share with you and know that it will be honored and protected because I have protected it this long.
I have a question for Elena again. Going back to your upcoming restaurant Tallgrass that's opening this fall in Madison at again, what is the name of the museum again?
At the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art. So
At,
MMOCA. Yes.
I'm sorry, repeat that. M, what was the last thing you said?
MMOCA. So MMOCA. That's the museum. So
Well, what I'm thinking of that when I go there, I'm going to have a chance to taste First Nation culture. Have I phrased that correctly? Um, can you say, I mean, what will be on the menu? Will it be Native American, American Indian, indigenous, First Nation food that we'll be
um
tasting?
yeah, there's going to be some of that, but also and not exclusively that. Like I don't cook decolonized, like decolonized, whatever that means, pre-contact food, because I'm also a trained French practiced chef, and I take my craft very seriously, and I don't like to live in a box in any type of label. I mean, I'm a female chef, a butcher, a wild game specialist. I studied pastries. I just love the craft. And so I think by saying I'm decolonized or I only have indigenous ingredients, just tunnels me too much, and it prohibits what I want to be able to create, which is art in my kitchen. And I want to create an experience where you will leave having a deeper appreciation, not just for what a ho chunk is, but what for what food is and what a food experience is. And so although we will have some things, I have some partnerships in the works, like Nijoni Farms. I talked to them just this past weekend out of New Mexico about supplying lamb. I have the Texas Tribal Buffalo Project supplying us with bison. So we will have some proteins and experiences like that. But as we're developing the space, it's a little tricky because, like, the first floor restaurant space has to be a garde manger kitchen, so there's no cooking in the third floor space because we're ultimately in a museum with galleries and fire suppression systems and a bunch of things that are logistically a little bit difficult because of the space. So as we figure that out, we will also be figuring out the menu and how we're going to best provide the experience for individuals. But absolutely, I mean, I'm indigenous and I have access to ingredients that I know others don't. And I want to be able to share those when there's enough. So, and that's my big disclaimer. There are very well-known restaurants that focus on indigenous cuisine, and what isn't spoken about is the strain that they've put on First Nations communities when it comes to procuring the same ingredients for themselves. And for me, I don't want to do that. So when there's enough, I will share. And if not, I do 100% transparently want to defer those resources to our tribal communities. So if we're limited on something like wild rice, it won't be the feature on my menu.
It sounds like you're going to give a full buffet of flavors.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't just cook in a box. I have to be able to access it all. But that being said, I am a storyteller and I love food. So I can't wait to see what comes actually.
And Kathy, are there any other questions that, or did you have something you wanted to say?
I would like to make a comment, and I know there's at least one person from the culinary historians of Wisconsin, culinary historian enthusiasts of Wisconsin, and we're the culinary historians of Chicago. But I think if you want to think of us at some time, Chew, yes, 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 Karen, maybe we could have a group meeting where we come up and have one of your meals and make it
Yeah.
at least worthwhile for you to do it.
Yeah. That would be
Because I think at
amazing.
least 10 people probably would come from Chicago. And I don't know how many from Chew, but they're nearby, which is certainly, but we like to meet our friends from Chew. So keep us in mind when when you think you're in a position to make that happen.
I second that. That's great. And again, I'm always
I'm
in
glad, Scott.
Wisconsin half the time, so I'll just pop on over too. So
Yeah, so wonderful. Well, I really appreciate the chance to share a little bit of time this evening with everybody and to share this story. And I hope that if anything, you leave a little bit more inspired to share a meal with somebody and the conversation that's around the table during that meal. So grateful for the opportunity. Thank you for sharing time with me. And again, I'm raised in Chicago, born in Wisconsin, raised in Chicago.
Oh, I
But
didn't know that piece of you.
yeah,
Excellent.
that's another reason why I definitely wanted to contribute. My dad was a musician at Chess Records when I was growing up, so
Oh, wow.
I have a lot of ties to the community down there, and I always love being home and being connected there. So thank you for including me.
And Rebecca Lasky says, yes, we would love to meet you.
Yes,
So I'm not alone. And
wonderful.
Scott, and certainly, Karen Dunn. So, yes, we would love to make this work.
Wonderful.
All
Well, thank
right.
you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, everybody. Thank you.
Very
thank
good.
you
Thank you
so
so
much,
much.
Elena. Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.